Recording in progress. Whoop. There it goes. There it is. Oh, Vishakha. This one always like, I'm like, what the fuck, Vishakha? Um, because it's so like shocking and such powerful energy, but it's in this nice, harmonious, beautiful, balanced Libra. Um, and so it's kind of strange, right? It's like, what's Vishakha doing there? All this heat, all this I don't know, desire for success, wanting to rise up. This is, I think, really a lot of that energy. Because Vishakha, of course, we think of lightning and forked lightning. And this is a little bit different than like sheet lightning, or even sometimes you get that like one strand of lightning that comes down and strikes. And so this is that fork, that splitting. Um, I went to the chocolate groove thing yesterday, little dance party in the Toronto suburb there. And there was, I guess we just missed it about a half hour before we arrived. One of these huge trees that are in the park, one of the branches just fell. And there's no wind or there's nothing going on. This woman was just warming up with some Akashic voice stuff. And she's like, oh my God, I broke the tree. Uh, but that's kind of that Vishaka, that big shock, that crash, like, whoa, what just happened? And so that's the energy of the Vishaka, really shocking, really um takes you out of where you were and puts you someplace else very quickly. And so that's what it is. They sometimes, I've heard it described like it's Indra Agni. And Indra is sort of, he wields the thunderbolt, the lightning, and Agni is the fire. And so you think fire and lightning. I've heard it described more as like the fire and ice kind of idea, which is kind of what the energy is like. It's more opposed than fire and lightning. But then we also get, when we get into electromagnetic radiation here, we get the really radioactive stuff, the really deadly poisoned vessel kind of thing here. And of course, that means that Vishaka natives can have a lot of drinking problems. The fire, the heat, right? That sort of thing. Even the drugs, you could say, that sort of makes things a little bit more unstable, makes at least the environment more unstable so that anything can happen, which is one of the things about very strong, I think, about Vishaka and a few of the nakshatras, and maybe it's even a few of them as we go through Scorpio, because Jyeshtha is quite similar, another Indra one. But Indra, more than just wielding the lightning bolt, is that whole, what can we say, the whole environment sort of gets charged, the whole air becomes charged. And that's why there's lightning, because it's not just this like, oh, there's a charge there and a charge there. It's this whole sort of air, the whole environment feels very highly charged. And so that's something like Moon and Vishaka, for example, these people grew up, the culture they grew up in was really highly charged, very high energy. Anything could happen, that sort of thing with Vishaka. So they talk about it representing the potter's wheel. And so this is coming right up towards what's the next chakra? Anuradha, which also has a lot to do with the chakras and stuff. So when we think of that potter's wheel, we think of that whirling, that spinning almost energy. There's a centrifugal force pushing everything outwards, out to the edges to a certain degree with this, the energy of this as well. It's ruled by, and Jupiter's very interesting with the nakshatras. He always rolls these kind of, you're always surprised. Oh, wow, Jupiter's the ruler of Vishak, because you're thinking like fire and you're thinking these relationships and these really polar opposites in a sense coming together, which is kind of Libra energy in a way, and it's our relationship energy. We look for our opposite. But anyways, here we are with Jupiter, so it's an expansiveness. And so they sort of talk about like expansive shocks, expansive, and so it's kind of this, what could you say? It's a very expansive energy, you could say, in Vishak. It's again, it's not just that fork of lightning, it's the whole air is sort of charged like that. It's very, again, that splitting. And this is where I don't really understand the Libra connection, because this is a splitting energy, usually an energy of separation, an energy of coming apart. And maybe it's because it's the very end of Libra kind of crossing into Scorpio. Because Libra is sort of like you get married and you make the agreement, and as you're kind of moving towards that Scorpio, now it's time to have sex for your very first time in your whole life, right? And think of how charged that atmosphere is between these young couples who have just got married in Libra. Go ahead.
Yeah, and also like on a reflection on kind of from looking at all the nakshatras and each sign having three of them, it's like the first nakshatra of a sign is like, especially in Libra, would be more of the forming of a union when we have hasta, like how to put it together.
Yeah.
And then Svati is kind of how to maintain it, how to keep it straight. And then
Yeah.
Vishaka is how to end them properly, maybe like just with that flash. So maybe it's the kind of progression of three different like beginning, middle, and end of partnerships or
Well, I
whatever, or of
think there's a
balance
certain
in a way.
sense in Virgo, you've got this unbalance, this disagreement. And in Libra, you come to an agreement. In Scorpio, it's like you almost have to pay up now. Um, and whatever you've sort of compromised in Libra, now you've got to kind of like own up to that loss, that death, that new life that's coming sort of after. So I think it's kind of more of that sort of energy. Um, and there is definitely all these nakshatras that overlap from one sign to the other are carrying that energy over. It's a sort of an expression of how it does go from the union of Libra to the mystery of Scorpio. So trees, of course, the way we see them spreading their branches, that's what struck me about that tree yesterday. And of course, then I was laying down, just looking at all the tree branches, thinking of Vishaka and how they shred and stretch out. And that's almost that expansiveness of Vishaka, right? It's these forking out and branchings out are actually they're an expansive energy of the relationship almost. They're an expansive energy of us. And even when we get into a relationship, it's sort of, well, even astrologers, if you figure out the mathematics of it, like astrologically, can't remember who did this, but they basically came to the conclusion that relationships generally improve our lives by about 25%, just off the top. And so there's this sort of like, once you get into that relationship, there's an expense, you become something more now. We're always afraid, oh, my partner's going to limit me. But actually, when you get into a really true partnership, now you've become something more. You've expanded. You're two now in a sense. And so that's, I think, some of that branching and that forking. It's not so much I don't think it's so much of a separation like we see with the Virgo, which is a breakup sort of separation. It's just expansiveness of separation, almost a family tree now. You've got a union, and there's going to be this whole family tree that can come after that. And it's this massive expansion, really, of who you are as an individual. And so I don't think we really look at relationships and family so much that way, but that's certainly a different way to see them. No, so the number 5 came up a little bit with this Vishaka and white lotuses. Of course, the very pure daylight sort of lotuses. It's interesting though, because Vishaka is, well, at least if we're following the sun, and I guess these are moon signs, so that's not fair. But if we follow the sun, this is the point where the sun is just sort of setting in the chart. It's just you've got that like light in your eyes that you're on the highway just before it drops below the horizon, sort of thing. So there's also that sort of, I think there might even be something a bit blinding about this nakshatra and the way it expresses itself. And so they talk also about it rules over trees that bear red blossoms and fruit, sesame, green gram, cotton. And so it's like these trees that bear fruit. So it's you can say it's probably a very fruitful nakshatra because of that. But things are going to grow. They're usually like, one of the things that really struck me about the Vishakha natives was they're very driven for success, right? They really want power. They really want success. And the only way to really get that is through alliance building, I think, right? Any true sort of success is going to grow through building those alliances. And again, you get that expansiveness in a sense. You grow a big business and then you split it in a couple parts and maybe you compete with yourself or something, right? And so it's very business orientated sort of nakshatra this way. We can see Brahma, that creativity. We mentioned how it's probably quite a fruitful nakshatra. Sage Vashista, he's the guy who had the, pretty sure he's the one with the fish fulfilling cow, Raksha. And so at the end of the day, these Vishakhas, they cause a few problems. They're a bit, they're on the demonic side of things. They'd rather enjoy life and the pleasures and fruits of life.
But they're dharma driven.
Pardon me? Yeah,
They're dharma driven though.
They're driven towards meaning and purpose. But I think, yeah, when you get the Rakshas, the meaning and purpose is going to be more towards success and more material orientated, you could say, working with the materials of life. And that's Brahma also he's creating things, he's making things. And so that's also comes a little bit materialistic. The caste is Mlecha. These are like the butcher caste, the outcast, a branch of the outcasts, you could say. And so again, the moon here, these people are that culture, it's that highly charged air, like Rahu or the outcasts, you could say. Everything's sort of mixed. Sometimes you never really know what's going to happen or who's there or these kind of things. There can be something masked, but usually the caste of Malechas, sometimes these castes can also work within castes. So you can have like outcast Brahmins, for example, who are working the fire ceremonies and fire rituals. The cremation ground rituals, the death ceremonies. Even like a Brahmin person who becomes a surgeon, for example, by really strict tradition, they become an outcast. And so that's sort of these Malechas, these kind of butchers, as well as the surgeons who are cutting the body and these sort of things. And if we really think about that, the reason they become outcast in that is because once you start dealing with the body and you become sort of indifferent to all these bodies, it's almost pollutes the purity of your mind to a certain degree. And so that's why it was sort of the Brahmins just sort of didn't really touch each other. It was very namaste and don't be mixing your energy with all these dead bodies and stuff like that is really harsh. So you get Malacha, this sort of outcast, but that can be within castes as well. Very sort of sharp and soft energy. That's that sort of that mixed energy that we get with the Vishakha, the fire and ice kind of idea, that sort of thing. I remember, and I've got a video somewhere on my Instagram of me walking through a cotton field and I was videoing it. And of course, the camera never did justice to the kind of light that was in there, but the whole cotton field was covered in dew. And it was kind of this early morning light coming up, and we hit this cotton field, and wow, the light was just incredible. That's why I pulled out my camera. Um, and I was lost at some point going through this cotton field because the trail wasn't steady. But anyways, when you get that dew on these sort of white cottony balls, you get this really, wow, it can be this really bright, glaring sort of light that flashes on you. It's really lovely, but it's, of course, it's like driving into the sunset. You just got that light in your eyes, but it was beautiful light. The guna is sattvic here as well. And so there is that motivation for dharma, that motivation to find purpose and meaning and what they do. And the guna is ultimately, it's a sattvic energy. But I think the atmosphere of it might be sattvic, but it's sort of that sattvic outcast in a sense. That way. We see fiery. It's interesting that something so fiery is also kaf dosh, which is, well, almost the opposite of fire. Um, I guess as opposite as you get in regards to the doshas. But the kapha is usually very sticky. It's more attached to things to a certain degree. Yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of like when we're talking about lightning and like kapha and fire, it's kind of like lava when a volcano's first starting to erupt kind of thing, and you've got that hard, mucky lava kind of stuff, and lightning bolts are going off. It sounds like that's the period of Vishaka.
Well, that's a good way to describe it, especially because Vishaka goes into Scorpio, and that's sort of how I've always described Scorpio as being that lava more, that wet heat. It's like even Scorpio natives, they're a little bit difficult. When we deal with the constitution of a Scorpio native, say they're just very pure Scorpio, there's no other factors involved. But even my chart, I've got a bunch of other factors. Well, that even mixes them, but you've got the heat of Mars there, but you've got this wetness of Kapha. And so Scorpios are sort of this wet heat, this damp heat. And so it's a bit of a blend of Kapha Pitta in a sense when we get Scorpio natives. And so we can see that a little bit through Vishaka here. It's female gender. I haven't fully figured out these genders. They generally talk about, like, if you have planets poised there, like the fifth lord there is more likely to give female children. And even if your ninth lord is there, it might give a female guru sort of a thing. More females who show you how to do things, I guess, in a more general way. I also get a general sense that when it's a female nakshatra, that women that are born with these nakshatras generally have an easier time with the energy than men do. And maybe that's that relationship energy, you could say, that comes out, that women are much better with the relationship and that whole social thing than men in a general sense. Oh yeah, the Malechas, the outcasts. Anyways, this energy, it's the male tiger we get with this energy of Vishaka. And that's a little bit like well, this is a sexual energy, but it matches that energy of the Vishaka, where it's very striking. It's very shocking, comes out of nowhere. And that's like the tiger who just sort of pounces, right? I remember my acupuncture teacher used to talk a lot about this sort of tiger energy. And it's either the tiger in contemplation or the tiger pouncing. He's either sort of this enlightened tiger, fully content and at one with the world. And you see videos of like deer or rabbits just like hopping past tigers and people hanging out with tigers. And it's not an issue. These are tigers that are very well fed, of course, and they're just content. But when a tiger starts to get hungry, it's like, well, he knows it. Then all of a sudden he just pounces. He just jumps on one of those little humans that are hanging out with him, or one of those deer that are in the neighborhood. Of course, it's not always that easy to find food, but anyways, that's that pouncing tiger. And so in a way, that's a sort of sexual nature, I guess you would say, is the Vishakas, is to pounce and to really like really, they can be very aggressive in mating and things like that. Then we get this wood apple. This is just kind of a really hard apple that the elephants like to eat. There's a bunch of different, when you look up wood apples, it's kind of a bunch of different kinds of wood apples and things like this. It's not used for much, a little bit for sore throat, a little bit for the gut, for diarrhea, things like this. It also gets used for things like inks and dyes and paints and stuff like that. And so, well, here I remember one of the symbols was that bright red flower, I think was one of the symbols of this. And there's something very, seems to me very sort of artistic and creative, and maybe it's connected with the Brahma rulership of this as well, but something very creative. And so we'll pay attention. I think I was studying too many nakshatras this week. I was kind of anyways, I'm split. I was working on Vishakha for the class, and I was working on, well, Shravan and another one, so I can get these things put onto my website, and so that they're ready for when we get to them. So Vishakha had me split. What can I say?
Typical.
Yeah, every nakshatra just sort of has its own obstacle we have to face up to. So at least that's my excuse. One of the things about Vishakha, we also notice there's two Pushkarana Vamshas in Vishakha. And so that gives really like half of Vishakha is really, really potent to give quite powerful and nourishing results to people. This sort of thing. See, they talked about the story of Radha and Krishna. Now, this is a beautiful story, but there's this sort of idea where Radha sometimes she looks into the mirror and she feels Krishna is right beside her, right? Kind of looking over her shoulder with his flute, and he's right there, and that's her experience of reality. But when she looks into the mirror, you don't see Krishna in the mirror. It's just her there by herself. And that's also sort of, in a way, I think that's this, even the Hare Krishna temples, they, with all their singing and dance and music, they sort of really seek to charge up the atmosphere in a very joyous, nice way, right? Things aren't always necessarily negatively charged atmosphere. They can be very nice, like Radha Krishna. This kind of thing. It's that sort of impossible love. She was, how did that go? Was that the end of the war? Anyways, at some point in time, Krishna got sick, and they said, oh, well, some sage came along and said, oh, only the dust from the feet of someone who loves him will cure him. And so they went around, and his wives, they had no feet because they're all princesses, and they went to the milkmaids. I'm doing a really quick version of this. They went to the milkmaids, and they were all down by the river with dust on their feet, and there was Radha was one of these milkmaids, of course, too, and so they cured him. This Indra Agni, I just sort of see, it's interesting here too, because Indra rules Jyeshta and Agni rules Kritika. And here it's almost like that mix maybe of Jyeshta and Kritika coming into this. Yeah, and they're very interesting too, because Kritika is sort of the champion, where Jyeshta is the hero. And so they're very similar sort of energies, but like Indra Agni, like fire and lightning, they're very, very similar, but they're still quite different somehow. And so it's that hero Jyeshta who sort of builds up energy and then wins in a sense. Like lightning, right? The energy gets so charged and then it strikes. Whereas I think Kritika and Jyeshta is more that they build up that internal heat themselves, and then they go off and fight and win. Where Jyeshtas can kind of, and even lightning sort of starts the battle with nothing, very weak, and gets stronger as the energy becomes more charged, as the foe becomes more powerful, the hero becomes more powerful, in a sense.
What did you call Kritika? Just the hero and Kritika is.
the champion. Generally speaking. It's sort of like, even in Roman myth, you've got Hercules and Perseus, right? The two heroes. Was it you that was telling me about the Hercules show? Apparently there's a show, a cartoon about Hercules, and he's got his publicist is with him. And they say, why is Hercules more famous than Perseus? And he's like, oh, it's all publicists. He got a publicist, he's got a better agent. Yeah. So, and it's true, there was way more stories about Hercules, right, being told, even though Perseus was off doing his thing. So there's very much a lot in Vishakha. The sense of fire and like the two fire sticks being rubbed together to make a fire. If we think of, well, in Vedic stories, one of the best, what is he? He's the best student, you could say, the ideal student. They call him dry tinder. Because they're ready, right? They're dry, the wood is dry, and the guru is ready. Just put a spark to that, and the student will just burn, no problem. And so there's that sense of dry tinder, but Vishakha is almost that spark that gets that going and gets that burning. I've recently added these sort of shlokas to these gods and these deities. That'll be in the next thing. Drupadi. So there's a whole sort of energy of Drupadi energy all through the different layers of myth and God and reality. But she was sort of this reincarnation of Radha in a sense, who was a reincarnation of Lakshmi. Now there's something in Vishakha, they call it the fire pan. I think this refers to it as being the vagina, the place where you put your, and there's a lot of the myths where they drop their seed, their semen into the fire for it to gestate and come to life, you could say. And so there's a lot there to do with that sort of the women, the matriarch, you could say, in a sense here, and maybe that's that female rulership of this, but that matriarchal thing sort of comes in here, that the great mother. We see the vagina, where else does it come up? It just came up in another one. But here we get that sort of like, this is the platform on which the fire ritual takes place. And what they're doing in the fire ritual, they're putting ghee in the fire ritual, and ghee is a metaphor for life. And well, you see how it gives life to the fire, and sort of the same idea is that when we ejaculate into woman, we've put life into the fire, and so then it flares up and sort of has a life of its own. The combination of ghee and fire, you could say. So you get this kind of stuff coming up, that idea of the potter's wheel here. I mentioned the chakras and the centrifugal force that comes through here. I had a sense also the wheel of Dharma might also be involved with here. It's also that sort of captain's wheel, that ship's wheel. The triumphal gateway, and so these people generally win in the end. They enter that gateway, but these gateways here, did I yeah, the inner, well, anyways, the gateways, when we see them in these nakshatras, these different gateways, these are portals to other dimensions. These are portals through other worlds. We mentioned that shocking nature of the Vishakha. It can carry you from one place to another. And that's that sort of gateway, that triumph. You go through that, you go through maybe even that sense of going through hell, walking through the fires, and then you come out at the end sort of purified and reborn in Scorpio. That makes sense to me. So that's kind of that archway, I think. Even after you get married, it's like, well, now you get married and you don't really, even in a lot of cultures, you're not fully married until you've had sex. And then once you've had sex and the man has ejaculated into his wife, and okay, now you're married. So that's sort of that. And there's sort of a, we talk about it a little bit in Barani to a certain degree, and maybe even Kritika. That's interesting. Kritika comes up here again because those are sort of the sexual developments of the masculine and feminine over there. And Barani also is another gateway, and I've talked about that being that gateway of loss of innocence. That once we have sex, once we sort of cross that line into Scorpio, there's this bit of a loss of innocence that goes on there. Uh, Scorpio is also, it's the 12th house from Sagittarius, from the ninth sort of thing. And so there's this loss of dharma, loss of faith can all happen in there. And that's often what drives us to cross those lines, is because we've had a loss of faith, for example. And so these are all sort of like gateways that we cross. And in a sense, there's kind of no going back once we've crossed these archways. So we see the arms and the breasts here. I think there's something to do with color blindness here. Like even something like welder's flash, for example. We talked about the sun in the eyes and all that kind of stuff there comes out as well. This mix of pith and kapha can be bad for the stomach. Ulcers are also possible, and that kind of thing. So let's kind of go past this. I don't think these stars from the Western perspective brought anything good at all. And so transits past here are usually a little bit difficult. So we see some themes here, this brainstorms, the expansive shocks. Again, the underdog pulling one off here, right? It's like nobody expected that to happen. Or someone like coming from behind and that's great comebacks. So there is that sort of strength, that brilliance, that all of a sudden that perfection, everything kind of comes together in a sense through Vishakha, and you kind of pull one off in a way. That purification here, purification by fire. Again, any kind of fire rituals people can be involved in, any kind of working with fire. Certainly anything that's going to sort of transform people or oneself in a sense will be here. Vishakha reminds us we have to sacrifice something in order to get anything important. And that's certainly true with relationships. We have to give something. Once we compromise something, and spirituality is always say the same thing with spirituality. You give all of yourself, everything you have, and you get the whole universe back in return. And relationships are very similar to this. You really give everything you have, and what you get back in return when you've got a partner that's mirroring you like that can be really incredible. And valuable. So something really worth having. So when we speak of what we love, what we're passionate about, we need to talk about what we sacrificed for that. What did we sacrifice to get it? It's kind of like, well, it's even like things like doing energy work and things like this. Some people are sort of like, they come for this energy work, for an astrology reading, for an acupuncture thing. Maybe you're doing some sort of chakra, Reiki, whatever it is. They come for this and they want you to fix them. They want you to heal them or help them or get some insight, or they want something from you. And generally what you find is people are only going to get from something as much as they put into it. And so it's like the person who say goes online for astrologers and they send messages to 10 astrologers looking for their free readings. They're going to get like, half of them are going to be complete garbage. One or two of them might be decent, but they can't sort them out from all the garbage. And so they really sort of get what they pay for in a sense. And so when we really, and that's sort of like myself, I don't always work by money directly. It's like people that want to put in time and put in effort and really give something to themselves to sort of learn this study. I become very, very lenient when it comes with money. I'm kind of like, oh, whatever. It's if you're willing and you're here, I'm happy. That's really, you put that effort kind of thing, right? Um, and so it's even like the a lot of teachers, they like the students who ask questions as well, sort of thing, because it shows that the student is engaged and they're putting their halfway. But this isn't just in teaching, it's in anything. We got to give something of ourselves to really get anything out of from anything, is really the point of that. And so that's, I think that's Vishaka, sort of, you've compromised in Libra now, you've given something to yourself. And so now you're looking for that payback in a sense. Um, we see with energies, it's very radioactive, radium, plutonium, radiology, that splitting of the atom, all of that sort of energy. We'll see some scientists, quite a few scientists have this sort of thing. Even that whole duality that we find with tantric philosophy, everything's 100% Shiva, everything's 100% Shakti, right? Everything's just nature, everything's just spirit. And it's not a 50-50 thing. It's 100% thing. And that's the same way the scientists are sort of looking at waves and particles now. They're like, oh, if you look for waves, it's all just waves. If you look for particles, it's all just particles. And what does it mean? Like, you don't even like recognize a wave when you're seeing the particles, sort of thing. It's like they don't even exist. And so that's same as this world. If you're looking for Shakti, you'll just see Shakti. If you're looking for Shiva, you'll just see Shiva. So that way, that's kind of what the difference is between, say, a scientist and a spiritualist. The spiritualist is looking for Shiva, the scientist is looking for Shakti. And that's, so then you get all the kind of alchemy and what they call magic, but like the technologies and all of that sort of come through the Shakti line. The sort of darker tantras, what we call them, the light tantras, are just purely looking for spirit, and purely focused on that. And so that's the same thing they sort of say too, when you get certain powers from your spiritual practice, when you start to abuse them, it's because you're kind of focused on the material that you can get from that. And so you lose sight to a certain degree of just the pure spiritual intention of the universe, I guess. So yeah, that buildup of atmospheric energy just before the storm, the electric shocks, all that sort of stuff. Even when we think of the shock and that buildup of energy that breaks, this is also a seed. When a seed sprouts, that seed sits in the water, in the water or in the soil, and all of a sudden the seed cracks open and this little sprout comes up. That's that Vishaka energy. It's like it's arisen now. And so very kind of cool like that as well. So we'll just, what are we at? Oh, we're got time. I always think, oh, we got a lot. Oh, we haven't gotten that much time. We got lots of time, and then we run out of time. Um, so
Well,
yeah,
when we start getting into charts and start like going through stories of people and that kind of stuff, it just like changes the whole pace of it, right? So it makes sense.
yeah, it really does. Yeah, so yeah, here's what else we get from Vishaka. I was gonna say something there. I lost it. But anyway, so this is yeah, I'm just cruising through that. Let's cruise through that. Just cruise through all of this. There we go. I like the names. The names are fun. Um, so we see some very powerful, like, wow, look at these people at the top of this. I've always disclaimers over the ascendant position all the time. I no responsibility whatsoever for it. That's by our good luck, whether or not it's correct or not. But when we see these names like Julius Caesar and Pompey, and Julius Caesar was like that massive, caused a massive rift in Rome, and Pompey was a big part of that. Uh, the power struggles, the splitting of powers, all of that kind of thing. Desmond Tutu, I imagine that would probably, can't remember what exactly he did. He was in South America. He was all about peace, sort of thing. And that kind of thing. I think he might have also been quite, brought a lot of shock. He was in prison and yeah, there, people were pretty split over whether or not he was any good or not. Um, that kind of thing. Jean Chrétien is here. Trying to think how Jean Chrétien might have split things, but he had a few scandals. He stayed out of the. Um, I was shitting out. Anyways, it doesn't matter. So he had a few things. We see the Herman Oberth working with rocketry. Yuri Gagarin also was a space, Russian space program type guy. Someone like John Graham Burge is really interesting. He was I think it was in Chicago. He was a Chicago police captain of some sort that they were running these black sites in the Chicago police force, and they're actually taking people and torturing them and taking money from them, and it was sort of this black site prison they were taking people to. Uh, and so that was John, so very shocking, of course, right? So John Graham Burge was involved with that. Marquis de Sade, he'll also make sense. He would be Vishakha. Also very, very shocking. Harvey Weinstein as well. See, Marquis de Sade and Harvey Weinstein are sort of similar. John Leslie, he also had accusations against him. Not sure, I'd have to look. I wrote accusations, so I'm sure he wasn't charged, but it was enough to ruin his life anyways, whether he did it or not. So we get something like that. When we get to the women, we get like Demi Moore. Geez, she was a shock, man. In the 80s, she came out in Hollywood and she was just like, wow, nobody could believe what she was up to. Chelsea Clinton, that's kind of interesting. I wonder how much of a shock her parents' love lives are to her. And some of the things she's heard about her parents online must have been quite shocking. But I imagine Chelsea Clinton, she's really raised coming up to be the next Hillary Clinton. And so she's got some surprises in store for us, I guess. Well, I'm not sure when her mother dies, then she'll come in the news more, maybe. Who else we got? Ronald Papa, he's a computer expert kind of guy, computer engineer. Valerie, Mike Toth, he's a land developer actually. And so that's another way this splitting would sort of come up. Like, so he bought a big piece of land and now he's splitting it into parcels and developing it and doing all of the development himself and everything like that. So that's another way. And that's also sort of you can say it's a good example of the expansiveness of splitting, right? So he buys this big piece of land. It's not that he gets more land, but all of a sudden now there's, instead of one piece of land for one home, there's enough for 10 or something like that. And certainly the money as it goes, I wonder if it would relate to any kind of pyramid scheme too, in a rough way, because it's almost like that splitting is that growth. And that's almost what this pyramid scheme does. I get 5 people to sell for me and I get a little cut of all their sales, and right, and it goes on and on and on. And the people that started when they were 12 and did it to their 60 makes money. So there's a bit of that. If I look at the women involved here, well, even Valerie, I could bring her over here. It's like quite highly educated psychoanalysts, PhD philosophers, things like that. Valerie C, actually, she worked in where was it? The South Pole for a long time. North Pole, South Pole, I think she was, Antarctica. So she went down there. You'd think even that splitting and cracking of ice would be very Vishakha as well. Looking at a younger, I don't know, maybe his style sort of rocked the world. I don't know if he's kind of caused a split in the yoga world or anything like that, but he gets criticism as his yoga was, it was sort of designed to train the Bhutan army. And so a lot of things that actually make you really, really peaceful are not involved in a younger yoga. And so there is, it's a bit of that split between yoga and physical therapy in a sense. To that degree. David Frawley, I'm not sure. We think of that energy of Vishakha where it sort of carries you from one place to another. David Frawley certainly done that. I don't know. He's like a little California boy who suddenly this big Indian Guruji now. But then you would almost say the same for me, but I haven't quite changed my identity the way he has. I still basically, I don't know, I still feel like I'm basically Mike. Basically the same person I've always been in a lot of ways. We see a lot of computer stuff here as well. I think if we think of like synapses firing in a sense, or this kind of things, nerve signals firing, that firing of electricity going through circuits and stuff like that. So we got some dude working with AI, Johannes Vermeer, he was working with a lot of optics as well. And that's sort of that glint and glitter. Timothy McVeigh, we get some serial killers, Bugsy Siegel, John Wayne Gacy, Clint Eastwood. Movie stars are interesting, right? Like, well, Clint Eastwood hasn't actually killed anybody that we know of, but he would still have a lot of that sort of gangster Bugsy Siegel kind of energy, right? Like, just look at his kill count on YouTube. So in that way, it's just kind of, it's a show for him so that the energy softens somehow, but it still comes quite similar. Go ahead, punk, make my day sort of stuff. Prince was obviously 30 years before his time, I think. He would fit in, what he was doing in the 80s would fit in now, I think. Prince. I don't know if anybody listens to him anymore. I'm just trying to think of some of the major splitting or shocking. Of course, Jeffrey Epstein. That rebellious energy. Oh, we're into the third and here only, so we're still in Libra. Okay, Daniel. Couple photographers and fashion people and the people I know here on the fourth or the third pada. Anyways, let's skip to sun so we can start opening some charts. Whose chart do we want to see? So that sun, one of the things about sun and Vishakha is that it's going to be very bright. Like the kind of light these people are going to shine, it's going to be glittery almost. It's going to be shocking light. It's going to be, I don't know, it's like you're going down a train tunnel, for example, and there's these shafts of light and suddenly you see someone's face and then it's gone. It'll be almost that kind of light. I think that's why we got some photographers, a few models as well here. Got some real estate people, also sort of, what were they doing? Flipping homes kind of stuff. Just give me a second. I'm going to, Emmett, I'm going to cut this off because there's a bit of a major leak behind me in the house and I think I know where it's coming from and how to fix it. And so I'm gonna I'm gonna go, it's like it's raining like crazy out and I hear this water and I'm like, what is that? And it's just over my shoulder coming from in the house. So I'm gonna go deal with this. Shocking, splitting. That's it. We got the storm cut us off. So I'm gonna go deal with my friend. And
Cool.
so Sun and Vishakha, we'll try to remember that. and we'll see if we can't get together and chat about the rest of this for an hour or something like that. So,
Okay,
okay.
later, Mike.
My friend, thank you.